Today, the Donald Trump administration officially announced their withdrawal from negotiations to end the Russia-Ukraine war. They stated that they no longer want to be mediators in the negotiations and declared that Russia and Ukraine should now negotiate directly with each other. In particular, the United States State Department stated that the United States authorities, of course, remain committed to the goal of achieving peace in Ukraine, but are no longer determined to continue. Quote, "To fly all over the world at the first call in order to act as mediators at meetings." And here it is very important to note that the European Union has prepared a plan B in case the United States withdraws from negotiations to end the war of Russia against Ukraine. In Europe, a backup plan has been developed in case the United States refuses to mediate in the war in Ukraine. Kaja Kallas, head of European diplomacy, stated this. At the same time, the European Union fears that Trump might abandon Ukraine and make some kind of deal with the Russian Federation. But it is important to note here that the Americans' withdrawal from the negotiations has both advantages and disadvantages. In this episode, we will discuss both of these aspects in detail. I'm Alexei Pechi. It's May 2nd. Let's go through everything step by step. So, the United States will not act as a mediator for the first call between Russia and Ukraine. The United States authorities remain committed to the goal of achieving peace in Ukraine, but they no longer intend to fly around the world at the first call to act as mediators at meetings. This was stated by State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. She says that the United States of America intends to change its approach to negotiations on a peaceful settlement of Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. And they will no longer fly around the world to act as mediators between warring countries. Next is her quote, "We are, of course, still committed to this and will help and do everything we can. But we are not going to fly all over the world at the first call to act as mediators at meetings. Now is the time for Ukraine and Russia to present and develop concrete ideas on how this conflict will end. It will now depend on them." A few hours earlier, before this statement, Temi Bryas, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, stated on a television channel that Moscow and Kyiv are still far from reaching a compromise on a peaceful settlement. According to him, United States President Donald Trump will soon have to decide how much longer he intends to continue mediating between the warring parties. Marco Rubio, "We've made progress. This is unprecedented. It wasn't possible 3 years ago. We see what it will cost Ukraine to stop, and we see what it will cost Russia to stop. The problem is that these positions are still too far apart from each other." But it's interesting that in the European Union, and you and I have talked about this, by the way, a few days ago, they prepared a plan B in case the United States really withdraws from the negotiations on ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. So the European Union is developing a plan B to maintain sanctions against Russia, in case President Donald Trump's administration announces its withdrawal from the peace negotiations in Ukraine and moves closer to Moscow. This was stated in particular by the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. According to her, there are fears in Europe that the United States might abandon Ukraine, leave Ukraine behind, and try to make a deal with Russia, since the negotiation process has proven to be too complicated. Supposedly, the White House expected that everything would be much simpler, that they would stop the war, force Kyiv to make concessions, and then make some deals with the Kremlin. It emerged that this is more complex, and the European Union fears that, realizing the difficulty, the United States might abandon Ukraine and say, "Handle it however you want, we'll make deals with Moscow." Kallas stated that Plan B is aimed at continuing economic pressure on Russia, even if Hungary blocks the extension of European Union sanctions in July. Next is her quote, "There is also a Plan B, but we should work according to Plan A, because otherwise you are focused on Plan B, and then it will become a reality." The head of European diplomacy explained, adding that negotiations with the United States and other partners to maintain the anti-Russian sanctions regime are ongoing. In a number of European capitals, there are discussions about whether to follow the United States if it abandons Ukraine and resets relations with the Russian Federation. They hope that they will no longer have to support Ukraine, said Kaja Kallas. She called it a false hope and emphasized that the Kremlin spends more than 9% of Russia's gross domestic product on the army and will definitely want to use this army again. Like, after all, they're not spending money on it for nothing, right? According to the head of European diplomacy, the European Union could take on financial assistance to Ukraine if the United States withdraws. But without the Americans, she admits, it will be difficult to fill the gaps in military supplies to Kyiv. Europe continues its attempts to convince the United States that the outcome of this war is also in American interests, adds Kallas. She also emphasized that no European Union country will agree to recognize Crimea as Russian. Here's the quote. As for Europe, we say this again and again, Crimea is Ukraine. The Americans have tools at their disposal that they can use to put pressure on Russia to stop this war. President Trump said he wants the killings to stop. He should put pressure on those who are committing these killings. Well, let me remind you here that in the American draft proposals for ending the war in Ukraine, which were brought to Paris on April 17th by Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, it included a provision on easing sanctions against Russia even before the end of peace negotiations. The European allies of Ukraine rejected these proposals and put forward a counter-draft, which provided for the gradual lifting of anti-Russian sanctions if Moscow does not violate the terms of the ceasefire. But here, as it were, one could say that that's what it was leading to, that Trump's team would withdraw from the negotiation process and that Putin really wants to continue the war. And nothing else. No gentle persuasion from Donald Trump had any effect on him, and for some reason, we never saw the tough sanctions that the United States president threatened. However, it's not entirely hopeless and not all is lost. It's premature to give up. What positives can there be in this situation? Let's do it this way and start with the negative. The statement by J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, where he insists that there should be direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia going forward, is a bad signal. In general, right now, the United States information line comes down to the idea that the United States has done everything possible. Of course, both sides are to blame. Ukraine needs to think, because it is weaker, supposedly, it should be the first to make some concessions. Our extremely important task, Ukraine's extremely important task, is to explain why direct negotiations with Russia are a trap. And it should be remembered that Jurist Dr. Vance's statement is an explanation for the internal American audience. Donald Trump's positions are about forcing Ukraine into such negotiations. These are two fundamentally different things. Moreover, it's important to understand that, of course, Trump and his team are looking for ways to explain themselves to the American people. Why hasn't Trump, who promised to end the war in 24 hours, actually ended it? And why are these negotiations still ongoing? Next, of course, they'll declare, listen, both sides are to blame, so let them sit down and sort it out themselves. We're stepping out of this, out of the positive. Let's find something positive here. Trump is stepping out of the negotiations. Well, at least for now, they're only rhetorically declaring that he's pulling out after the agreement on mineral resources and the symbolic allocation of weapons worth $50 million. Let me remind you. After signing the agreement, the White House sent a request to Congress asking for permission to sell weapons to Ukraine worth $50 million. This is the first tranche. Simply put, withdrawing from the negotiations does not imply stopping military aid. That's good. That's a good signal for us, for Ukraine. The main negotiations are not with Russia, not with the Americans. For us, negotiations in the Europe-United States of America format are very important, where we, Ukraine, are one of the three main issues. That is, if the three main issues are tariffs, the NATO umbrella over Europe, and Russia's war against Ukraine. And it is precisely these Europe-United States of America negotiations that will determine further financial and military assistance to Ukraine. Therefore, I can say that our main goal right now is not to quarrel with the United States of America and to be part of the security and economic perimeter of the negotiations between the European Union and the United States of America. Nevertheless, it should be noted that if such statements are already being voiced by Donald Trump's team, it means that the window of opportunity for negotiations is now closing. And it's obvious that next will come the summer offensive, because the weather is improving and both sides will go on the offensive. Well, or at least one of them, that's for sure. And accordingly, the next window of opportunity for negotiations will open, well, at best, by the end of the summer. Because right now, Russia is unlikely to enter into negotiations when it has been preparing for the next offensive. When the greenery appears, that is, when the trees are covered with leaves and when the weather conditions allow movement of heavy equipment. That's the situation. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinion and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like if you want to support the work of this channel. You can do this with any donation by scanning the quick response code on your screen. This platform is the simplest and most convenient way to support the work of this channel. I appreciate any donations. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.